Hello and welcome to another pattern recognition video. Now, I usually do 10 problems. I bumped the difficulty up a little bit. I had a viewer recommend that I do some sacrifice problems that are a little more difficult. So I set this to 1500 to 2000. Now, if you're a beginner, you can still try these. You know there'll be a sacrifice, so that'll make it a little bit easier than a real game where you don't know if there's a sacrifice or any other tactic. So you already have the advantage of knowing that there is a possible sacrifice tactic here. So look for checks, captures, and threats in that order, as checks are the most forcing. So you want to look at those first, and then captures, and then threats against pieces or the king. So here it's white's turn to move. Black has just captured on f5. So let's look at the material. We have looks like 5 pawns. Black has 5 pawns. And then we're down by what? Down by a knight. So that's probably what was captured. A knight was captured there. So as I mentioned, look for the checks first and pause the video at any time. And those of you not familiar with pattern recognition, basically you want to solve a series of puzzles like the 10 in this video, or any other group of puzzles. You go through them once nice and slow, trying to figure out the answer. And then you go back through multiple times, and hopefully each time you'll be able to solve the puzzles faster. And as you do that, you'll start to remember the patterns and tactics a lot better, and you'll be able to use them in your own games. So as I said, look for checks first. So pause if you want to think more, or if you've already figured it out. I'm going to say, if we're looking at checks first, maybe we can sacrifice our rook here on h8. Because of this pawn cutting off the king from running to f7, the king would be forced to capture. Well, then that could give us time to bring the rook over here, but maybe even better would be to bring our queen up here immediately. No, that doesn't work. If we brought our queen up here, the bishop could just capture it. So, once again, rook sacrifice, king captures. The other rook would need to move over, delivering check. If the king runs back to where it was, well, then we just sacrifice the other rook, bringing the king back out to the h-file. And then we can slide the queen over to h1, checking the king again. And the only thing our opponent can do is start blocking with pieces, and that only temporarily prevents a mate, because then the queen will end up here on h7, delivering mate. Now, that might have been a lot, especially for beginners. Let me know in comments, as always, if you would like to see more videos with harder problems, easier ones, or a mix of both. So here we go. Check. Check with the other rook. Then we sacrifice the second rook. And then we bring the queen over to check. And the only thing that can be done is to block. But now the king still ended up in check, and we deliver the mate here. So this is a pretty awesome pattern. That was rated 1669. So I hope you were able to figure that out. A pretty impressive checkmate. On to the next problem. All right, we have a knight under attack here. So your first instinct would be to move this knight, but it is a sacrifice tactic in all of these all of these puzzles. So, do we just let the knight under attack? And remember, when you offer a sacrifice, or you're thinking about taking a sacrifice, you don't have to. It's not like back in the 1800s and earlier, where they thought if a sacrifice is offered, your honor dictates that you must accept it. In the old days, a long time ago, it was considered cowardly not to accept a sacrifice. But chess players became wiser and they realized that it's not always good to accept the sacrifice. And let's see if that's the case here. But before we do, let's count up the material. We have 6 pawns versus their 7, I believe. 4, 7, yes. And they are ahead by what? They're ahead by a knight, which we could just capture their knight with our rook, but then they would capture. So we need to look at checks first. As I mentioned, checks are the most forcing because the king has to deal with that immediately. So the knight could deliver a check by moving. The rook could capture this pawn and deliver a check. But all 3 of those checks, the queen could capture. We do have another check way over here. Maybe that would do something. If we check, the king could just run. And do we have a follow-up? All right, so this one may be a little trickier. What can we do? If we get the queen into the game, into the action, what next? The king could just step forward. I don't really see a follow-up. After that, we could sacrifice this rook maybe. But then the queen could just capture. If we do that, the knight could move and fork, but we're already behind by a knight. So we need to do something that either wins the game by checkmate or gives us a big advantage. I don't know. I'm still thinking about that. Oh, okay. Sometimes you overthink things, and that's always a problem. Why don't we immediately sacrifice the rook? As I said, these are sacrifice puzzles, so I should look at those immediately. If we capture here, we're forking king and queen. So the queen would be forced to capture, but the problem is with that, then our knight can fork the king and queen. So pause the video if you need to figure that out in your head, and try to do as much in your head as you can whenever you're doing puzzles. All right, capture and the knight forks. Then we just take the queen there. All right, on to the next problem. Pawn is pushed forward attacking our knight. Do we just leave that knight there as a sacrifice? Possibly. Do we sacrifice another piece? And if so, how would we do that? Well, tricky stuff. So if we're looking at checks, captures, and threats in that order, checks first. Do we have any checks at all? I don't even think we have any way to check. So that's off the table. So captures and threats. So a lot of things can be captured. We're looking for a way to sacrifice. So maybe we capture this pawn, sacrificing our rook or the knight. So this is where it gets tricky and we have to do a little bit of calculation. And that's the issue with harder puzzles. You're going to have more calculation practice involved. Whereas if they're easier, it's more about pattern recognition and less about calculation. On the other hand, as you improve, you'll be able to do harder puzzles which work on both your pattern recognition and your calculation. All right. I'm still thinking about capturing. let's say if they capture, well, then our rook could grab theirs. I think that would work. So if we capture, they're probably going to take our rook, and they're still attacking our knight. But what if we just keep capturing? We grab this pawn. Now we're threatening to either take the knight and queen, get a queen, or just push forward and get a queen. So I think that's what I'm going to try. Capture, and then we'll just keep going. And now we can just promote to a queen. You know, or do we hold off? Do we save our knight first? Because do we have to be in a hurry to get this pawn promoted? There's nothing that can stop us, so maybe we should just go ahead and save our knight. You know, and if we drop back here, we would protect the other knight in case the rook, you know, tried to attack this knight over here. So that's the question now. Do we just go after the queen immediately? If we did that, we'd have a queen. They could capture our knight and threaten to capture here with check. So that could be dangerous for us. So maybe we just move our knight. Choices. And this is what makes chess so complicated sometimes. I think the computer might want us to just push this pawn and get the queen immediately. If they capture, we capture. Oh, okay, we can't. Once again, I was overthinking things. We have to promote immediately or he'll just take our pawn. So that decided that. Hopefully you did better than I did on that. All right, on to the next one. We have a queen blocking here. What can we do? Our queen is under attack. Their queen blocked our check to their king. What should we do here? All right, let's look at material. They have 4 pawns, we have 3. We each have a minor piece, 2 rooks, and a queen. So we're down by a pawn, and they have this huge 3-pawn majority over here on the queen side. We're looking for a sacrifice. Do we... Well, pause the video if you want to think things out on your own without me talking. If not, you know, the obvious move might be to just take, but then that would just lead to an even trade. So, what if we capture the rook, sacrificing our queen for the rook? You know, or I guess that's a trade and sacrificing material. And then, well, that doesn't work either. I was thinking about this rook on the open H file. What if we go there? Okay, we sacrifice that rook. We're pinning the king to the queen. So, if we do that, so rook checks, king captures, then what? Oh, once again, we have a fork with check. Okay, so we have to look at the follow-up. Hopefully you found that. We go here, checking. If the king just moves, then we pick off the queen with our rook. If the king captures, well, then our knight can jump up here, delivering a check to the king and attacking the queen. We'll pick that off next. So and there we go. And now we're just ahead in material. So once they take our knight with the bishop, then we'll have what? A queen and rook versus two rooks and a bishop. All right, on to the next problem. What do we have here? Rook moving to e8 to help defend this knight, which our bishop is attacking. I don't even think any pieces or pawns have been captured yet. So all the original material is on the board. We're looking for a sacrifice. And sometimes it's hard to spot sacrifices when the board is so crowded like this. Do we take that knight? Then probably the queen captures. We could try and push this pawn up, threaten to trap the bishop, but there would be time to push their pawn and let their bishop escape. No, the bishop could just go here anyway. All right. What else do we have? Or do we have the classic bishop sacrifice on h7? So whenever you have a bishop lined up on the h7 pawn, the knight is ready to jump up here to g5, checking if the king recaptures the bishop, and the queen can also jump up here to h5. That is something you always want to take a look at if that possibility is, up in the air here. So if we capture and they accept our sacrifice, remember, the opponent doesn't have to accept the sacrifice, but if they don't take our bishop, well then, what happens next? If we capture, maybe they'll try and trap our bishop by pushing that up. So that's a possibility we have to think about. But first, let's look at what would happen if they capture. So bishop takes pawn on h7. King recaptures. Now that gives us time to bring a knight up with check. And the king has multiple choices on what it can do next. It could retreat back to g8. Could try and come forward. But our queen will try and move up here next and start an attack. The only issue is looks like this knight could move here maybe and protect that square, preventing the queen from going there. But then we could attack this way. So this is where it gets complicated and you have to work on your calculation. But you should try and remember this pattern of bishop captures, king captures, knight delivers a check to the king, and then the queen can quickly get up here. So let's try it. That, check. Now if the queen goes up here, the knight is covering that, preventing a further attack by the queen up here, but instead we can go this way. And let's see if that is best. If we do that, the king is forced to the edge. So that looks to be the way to keep going. Right there. All right. So this is where it ended. How could the game continue? Well, the king only has one option. Remember, when a king is under attack, it's in check. Three options or less. Capture the attacker. That's not possible. Block the attacker. That's not possible when they're side by side like that. Or run. That's the only option. And this is the only square the king can run to. Now, if we wanted to draw, we could just go back and forth here and here, checking. But what would you do if there's a win? Or how would you go about trying to win? If we go here, we do have this bishop. Let's pull up, I'm going to pull up the analysis and try and look at, after this position, which is what we were just looking at, the recommendation is to go queen to h, well, excuse me, the king has to move. And then rook at a to e1 is recommended. Rook at a to e, no, now it's saying queen to h5 is best. So the computer just recommends going there. King is forced back to g8. And it's going to tell me to go back up to queen to f7, saying that's best. If we go there, once again, the king has to go back here. And now rook at a to e1. Rook at a to e1. So it wants us to bring our rook over here. A threat might be to go up here and then swing over, but that's 1, 2, 3 moves. And the bishop could capture here, preventing us from bringing our rook up. So I'll play this out a little bit in case you're curious. Rook at a to e1. Knight to f5. Apparently that's the best move. That also keeps the rook from moving up. Now what? Queen to h5. King to g8. Queen to f7. No, now they're recommending that we knock the knight out. And then here the best move is to give up the queen by taking our knight. Because if, the king can't capture its immediate mate here. So if the rook takes, well then we have an immediate mate there. So if we go back a move, here the queen would have to give itself up. What's another option? The knight blocks, but white would be winning. All right, let me get back to the puzzles. We have 5 more to go, so I'll try and speed this up a little bit. In this problem, the knight was attacking black's king, so the king steps forward and counterattacks the knight. What can white do here? We're looking for checks, captures, and threats in that order. If we look at checks first, what can we do? All right. Well, okay. We could look at a queen sacrifice. I don't know if that works, but let's see. If the queen takes here, the king would be forced to capture the queen. But do we have any kind of follow-up? I don't know. I don't see anything. If we go there, the queen would just be captured. And I don't think we have anything. So what about knight delivers check? If the rook captures, our queen just captures. And then what's the material look like as far as pawns? We have 5, they have 5, but they have this passed pawn here. All right. What about this check? Does that do anything? Oh, okay. We have this check as well. Check. But then the king could just take our knight. And then what? Oh, we could attack there. Okay, let's see if that works. A lot going on in this. So we check here, checking the king. If the king takes our knight, we could go there with check. The problem is, I guess he could block with the rook. All right, it's getting crazy here. Oh, and we have to watch out. There's a threat here of checking our king. So if we check, that looks like it might be best. They could block with the bishop or the rook. But I'm thinking we're lined up on their queen. We could move ours with check, move our bishop with check here. All right, I'm going to go for that. So they take that. Now we could deliver a check with our bishop, unless there's anything better, but we deliver the check. They're going to have to block with the bishop or rook. And we'll be lined up on their queen. So check. Oh, the king runs instead. Huh. Well, now we could just pick off their queen. That's probably the best move. All right. I want to take a look at what would have happened if we go, okay, they go there, we checked, the king takes, and we go there. Now, what if they block here with check? Well, then, if they block with the bishop, then we can just go ahead and take their queen. But what if they blocked with the rook? That leads to a mate 9, apparently. So here, oh, we can still take the queen because that rook would be pinned. All right, anyway, back to the final problems here. So the next problem. I hope you're doing well with these problems so far. What do we have? Queen moved up to our 7th or our 2nd rank, their 7th rank, targeting these pawns, threatening to capture with check. So what can we do? All right. Do we want to sacrifice a pawn this time? Do we go after that? our opponent could just capture the pawn, but then our rook could attack. We could block and attack their queen. So they would probably immediately just, if we take their rook, they'll immediately recapture. You know, if we move our queen here, threatening a mate in 1, right here, well, then they could just protect by going here. All right, we have another tough one here. All right, that's the most forcing threat. If we go there, but they can't capture, we'll just go there and we're still threatening mate here. So if we go there, they're pretty much forced to go here. Oh, wow. Okay, maybe that works. Okay, pause the video if you need to figure this out. If not, we're going to go for that mate in 1 here. They're going to have to protect. But now we could drop our knight here and threaten a mate there. If they capture, well, then our queen can just move back over and deliver a mate on the H-file. So pause and look at that if you need more time to think. If not, here we go. Now we're threatening a mate up there, so they capture our knight, but we can just deliver a mate here. So I hope you did well on that one. On to the next one. Okay, a pawn is pushed forward. One thing we want to look at is that diagonal. It just opened up to the rook, but if we go here attacking the rook, it looks like they could just block with their bishop. Maybe. We also have this bishop lined up on the f7 square, which is a pretty big weakness. So perhaps we should try and target that weakness. If we could get our queen up here, and we have this bishop lined up here as well, maybe we sacrifice our knight to open things up. So knight captures, pawn captures, then our queen checks. If they block with this pawn, we take with check again. We're attacking their rook. So that looks to be the way to go. Now we can just pick off their rook. And their knight is under attack by bishop and queen. So, you know, they'll probably move their knight out, and now our queen is kind of trapped, so we have to be careful with that. But we could move our bishop up and try and target things. All right, I'm not going to go into that. So let's move on. We have 2 final puzzles here. There was just a capture in the center. What do we do? What does white do in this position? All right. Can we just attack their queen? That's the first thing that comes to mind. Lining up, you know, pinning their queen to their king. The king could just take our bishop. No, our queen is protecting that. But if their queen gives itself up, no, it wouldn't do that, because then we'd just be ahead in material. Okay. So that looks to be the move. But no, if we go here, this pawn could push out. So maybe that doesn't work. What if we sacrifice the rook? So this is a sacrifice puzzle. So if we sacrifice the rook, they're in check. Remember, when the king's in check, you either have to capture the attacker, block the attacker, or run. And that king wouldn't be able to run. So the queen would have to capture. Then we could check again. And I think they would lose their queen. So there we go. Oh no! All right, I got that one wrong. Okay. What did I do wrong there? Maybe one common problem when you're solving tactics, sometimes you have to change the order up. So maybe instead of checking with the rook first, maybe I needed to go there first and then bring the rook up. Yes, it looks like that's what we had to do. Check first with the bishop. Then they blocked, and I didn't analyze it enough. I should have calculated more. Now maybe we sacrifice the rook. There you go. And then we can just pick that off. Okay, so just remember that. That's a good lesson to learn. Sometimes you want to double check the order of your tactics. So there, I thought I had to move the rook first and then the bishop, and I needed to reverse it. Attack with the bishop first and then the rook. All right, the final problem. Are you ready? Here we go. The knight has just moved forward, pretty much trapping our rook here. So what are we going to do about that? Well, this is a sacrifice tactic or puzzle video. What are we going to sacrifice? We could give up our rook. The opponent captures, but then our queen can jump up where that rook was and threaten a mate in one. So maybe that works. All right, that's what I'm thinking we'll try. Oh, or even better. So when you think you found a good move or plan, just double check. There might be a better one. What if we check immediately? And once again, checks, captures, and threats in that order, checks first because they're most forcing. We check the king. The only thing it can do is take. And then our queen jumps right in there delivering check. The king will move back to where it was, and then we mate on h2. So awesome little pattern there, puzzle, both. All right, well, I hope you did well on those puzzles. Feel free to leave comments. As always, like and subscribe to support the channel if you haven't already. Thank you for watching and have a super chess day.